Hello, Freedom fans. David Allen Carmichael, Preservative Talk. Today I've got a special discussion about unnumbering your child if they've been numbered. I know that's strange to some people, but some people are pretty concerned about it and wonder if somebody's filled out some paperwork behind their back, is there anything they can do about it? So I'm going to be giving you some information about that today. So my background, as some of you know and some of you don't, is I'm a minister of the gospel who's an advocate for religious liberty and doing those things that are necessary to help people preserve their life, liberty, and establish justice, etc. So I've had a few cases in the United States courts where we've been successful. 4 reports in the law books out of 3 cases. I'm sorry, out of 3 courts and 4 opinions, published opinions. So it's a little bit of my background. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about, yes, unnumbering your child after the enumeration at birth. So I'm going to talk about the Enumeration at Birth program, what it is. We're going to have in this outline discussion here, we'll be able to show you some documents that tell you something about it. We're going to talk about the law. Is there law? What does the law require? What does it not require? In fact, what protections of law are there for you? And what are the pitfalls of numbering your child at birth? And it's a good example. We're going to actually show you an example of an erroneous enumeration at birth and what was done to make it go away. And so there's a little administration you have to do. It's very simple. And we're going to actually show you an example where it worked. So we're going to have open discussion and a summary of what we talked about at the very end. So here it is. What is this? What are you talking about numbering? Well, some people just know that they have a natural right to not be treated like cattle and to be numbered. And other people have been reading the Bible, and there's this little section in Revelation chapter 13 talking about section 666. Well, there's a 666 in the Federal Welfare Code, and I'm going to introduce it to you. Now, I just want to tell you ahead of time, this is a happy spoiler alert. If your child is not numbered, all the mandates of 666 don't apply to them at all. And it's acknowledged by the powers that are in charge that if your child is unnumbered, their little 666 thing doesn't apply to you. So we're going to come to 42 United States Code section 666 paragraph A, and then we're going to come down to subparagraph 13. So 42 USC section 666, paragraph A13. Let's see what we got here. There's 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. Let's zoom in a little bit so we can see the text a little bit better, and you'll be able to read it with me. And this is a program that came, I call it the Contract on America back in the 90s, where some like NAFTA, GATT were going on, and the Religious Freedom Restoration Act was new, which is really good. But also there was this thing, you'll see, that was trying to track down deadbeat dads was the guise of the intention here. And let's see how this actually manifested. In paragraph A13 of section 666, recording of social security numbers in certain family matters. Notice they don't tell you what those matters are. Procedures requiring that the social security number of any applicant for a professional license, driver's license, occupational license, recreational license, or marriage license be recorded on the application. And then it goes on to any individual subject to a divorce decree, support order, paternity determination, etc. And any individual has died be placed on the records relating to the death be recorded on the death certificate. So basically, you can't do anything that requires a license without this beastly 666. So that's the pitfall of enumeration at birth. So I'm going to go back to my happy outline here. The Social Security policy statement regarding the unnumbered 666. So here we have this draconian looking statute that requires all the states, turns out the states that are accepting United States, or they call it federal welfare benefits, to institute this program where you can't do those things necessary in the ordinary purposes of life without this a number that you embrace as an element of your identity to do all those things. But let's see what the Social Security Administration says. And for those, you need to understand that the person who's supposed to interpret the law and apply it, the single most priority of all the little bureaucracies in America that have the responsibility, and everybody should look up to about defining or interpreting the statute, is the Social Security Administration. So I click the button. Let's see what it's got. So here's in the Office of Child Support Enforcement. These are the people who are enforcing 666 and this Deadbeat Dad Enumeration at Birth program. And I think let's go to this paragraph here where it says, we interpret the statutory language in 466, I'll explain how that turned into a 666, of the Act to require states have procedures which require an individual to furnish any Social Security number that he or she may have. Goes on to say, Section 466, manifested in the U.S. Code as 666, does not require that an individual have a Social Security number as a condition of receiving a license, etc. We would advise states, they can't require states, but we'd advise states to require persons who wish to apply for a license who do not have a Social Security number to submit a sworn affidavit under penalty of perjury along with their application stating that they do not have a Social Security number. So, and it goes on to other cases how that could be used. So currently, those who have been careful to not be entrapped by an enumeration program are free to get driver's license, marriage license, professional license, occupational license, recreational license, if there's no number associated with your name. So you're going to have other questions that pop into your mind. That's a different episode. So the Social Security Administration, they admit that you don't need a Social Security number. So here's a document that I got off the Social Security website. You see it talks about enumeration at birth, and it gives a Social Security Administration number or document number. And it goes, unless you're a non-citizen who wants to work in the United States, you probably don't need a Social Security number. So it goes on to explain what the Social Security number is in this document, and it's something you can look up online. Just use this information. Does a non-citizen need to have a Social Security number? And you can get this document. I think it's important reading so that you can kind of start to connect the dots on what's going on with this thing. Now, here's two letters that I'm going to show you where these people communicated directly to the Social Security Administration, asking them about what law requires somebody to have a Social Security number. So I'm going to check this Miller letter. And this is a letter I found through a website. And I want you to take note of this information on this letter. Notice how Social Security Administration here has put the TEH2A. Now, I believe that is the office code, a hierarchy, a authority structure within the administration that you could, even if they don't give a person's name, you could go into the Social Security telephone book and find out who it is that wrote this letter on a given day. So it talks to Mr. Miller. And look at the second paragraph. The Social Security, let's move it down. Social Security Act does not require a person to have a Social Security number to live and work in the United States, nor does it require a Social Security number simply for the purpose of having one. Now stop there. Everything else that talks about any other purpose or use of the Social Security number at this point is completely bogus. Because remember, it's the Social Security Administration that is the expert on their own stuff. They're not the expert on the IRS's stuff. They're not the expert on the Treasury Department's stuff. They're not, you see the point I'm making. They're an expert on their own thing. And according to their own thing, they say that there's no law requiring anybody in America to get a Social Security number. And look what it says, to work in the United States, nor for the purpose of having one. Uh-oh. This is reality. So how many people know that? Now, I tell you what, when I found out about it years ago, letter. Now, this is something that I have in my possession. Somebody contacted me years ago and showed me their letter that they got from the Social Security Administration because they were concerned about numbering their children. And they met with me, and we are now since friends, and we enjoy each other's company as a man of God, I think a gifted evangelist. And this is a letter they sent to him. And see again here in this second paragraph, the Social Security Act does not require, etc. So it tells straight out that there's no requirement. And then it goes on and says some things like was in the Miller letter, that they have no, really, they're not the experts on this. In fact, it ends up being a lie. The remainder is sort of a lie until they get to the point where they admit they don't have any expertise in it. But before they tell you they don't have any expertise about these other things, they begin to tell you the other things. Internal Revenue Code 26 U.S.C. 6109 and applicable regulations require a person to get and use Social Security number on tax documents to furnish the number to any other person or institution, etc. Well, if there's no law that requires anybody to get the number, how can the IRS for their forms require you to get a Social Security Administration number? It's not part of the Internal Revenue Service. It's not part of the Treasury Department. It's a separate entity. So this is a false statement. In fact, we've experienced people being able to get jobs without getting a Social Security number, so that's an important thing to know. So it continues on talking about internal revenue forms and things like that. And then let's see what it says on the next page. Privacy Act regulates the use of Social Security numbers by government agency. And then it tells you a little bit about, and again, it's kind of a misstatement of Social Security Act requirements. Someday we'll have another segment specifically on the Privacy Act and how it affects you and what you can do when things are violated. What's the process? But look at how we said it. Look what they say in this last paragraph. The Social Security Administration has no authority to interpret or enforce the law as it applies to programs that we do not administer. That's all they had to say in the beginning. But what's happening in this world is you're being told things to believe. And you're passing on the information of what you've heard instead of looking into it and find out what's true. And so our goal here at Preservative Talk is to find out what's true and communicate it to you so you can make an informed decision according to your conscience. And if there is an avenue of freedom for you, if we can show you the path to that freedom, it's one of your options. But if it's closed, if that information is closed to you, it's not an option. So that's part of our ministry. And then taxpayers, now watch, this is a very interesting thing. And I'm going to take a break here to try to give myself a plug. But before I do, there was this document that I found that I have that shows that somebody who prepares a tax return for people for money, gets paid for preparing tax returns, can do so without a Social Security number. So the preparer themselves doesn't have to register with the IRS to get what they call a PTIN, preparer's tax identification number. So for the sake of doing the processing of the tax returns, there's an account number assigned, but it is not a Social Security number. It's not something that you have to give to get a driver's license, professional license, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I find that fascinating. But the reason I didn't put the link here is because when I did, it crashed my computer. I got it from a government website. How's that? Arizona Cash and Assistance Program. I found this fascinating. That there's certain states, notwithstanding Section 666, and the federal government's desire to have every state make sure that somebody confesses this universal number as an element of their identity. And they use these social welfare programs as a mechanism of coercion to influence people to get these numbers because they believe it's an absolute requirement, and where it's not. Look where it says for an exception. And I want you to take note. It doesn't say exemption. There's a difference in law from an exemption to an exception. An exemption is something that they can allow you a waiver where you'd otherwise be required. An exception is something that's stated as an exception when it's not incumbent upon you to be subject to it. So there's the difference. Because you're not subject to it, look at the word here, exception. Social Security enumeration is not required when the participant meets any of the following. Is an undocumented non-citizen. Now think about it that way. An undocumented non-citizen is not required to participate in Social Security. Social Security Administration says nobody's required to participate. And here's this another ineligibility, but look at this bottom thing. It has a religious objection to obtaining or providing an SSN. The participant must be a member of a religious group whose teachings oppose applying for or using an SSN. And that's actually a misstatement. You don't have to be part of a group. Like say you go to church and everybody thinks you're a nut because you don't want to use an SSN. Guess what? You're free to be a nut in your church and still be protected under the law of the land. You got to think back in the Bible. I think my wife gave this quip to me years ago. In the Bible, the weird dudes were the real dudes. It was the Elijahs and the Jeremiahs, the ones who were singled out to being prophets of God, who were doing what was right. And broad is the way that leads to destruction to those who weren't doing what was right. So you're protected in law for doing that which is right. The participant statement is acceptable verification when no other verification is available. So you don't need to get a letter from the SSA saying there's no Social Security number, or you don't need a letter from your organization saying it. All you need to do is confess, as long as it's true, because I've seen court cases where people confessed it, oh, I don't identify with that number, but then all over the place they're identifying with the number for conveniences. But if this one thing's inconvenient, they claim a religious protection. No, that's basically a false statement. So think about this. If you're beginning to have religious convictions about that, you can in good conscience confess that number. And you don't want to get it for your children. You're not doing wrong. It's not unlawful. You're not being anti-government. You're actually upholding the highest end of government, which is to protect your life, your liberty, and establish justice. That is the happiness that you intend to achieve in your life. Let's go back. Oh, by the way, so I'm going to give myself a plug here. One of the things we're trying to do is equip people in these areas. Below, there's a share button that I would love you to give this to people who need to know this information. There's a subscribe button. Please subscribe. Please subscribe. Also, because I was chastised by people for not making, let's say, gifts available, there's a gift available. There's this little mug that's like a tip jar. And if you click the tip jar, it'll take you to the Streamlabs website that gives a portal to provide donations for what we're doing. If you want to, we'll just leave it at that. So, as I said here, 666 has this draconian, you got to use the number, you don't get a license to do anything. And again, this is not to talk about whether or not you're required to get licenses. Separate discussion. SSA policy says, with regard to 666, if the person is not associated with a number, that requirement doesn't apply to them. Now, if you want to get in the depths of how could it apply and argue over maybe like the deeper elements of law, that's one thing. I'm going to the elementary zone here. So people can practically do what is right to deal with situations that they're plugged into in society. So SSA, the Social Security Administration, we provided 2 letters there. There's a tax preparer's form that you can get a tax preparer ID without having a Social Security number. So you could actually live in the conviction of not participating with the Social Security program and I'll show you a code of federal regulations that talks about it. As I've done my research, this is a global, I had a document that you can read about. There's a global plan to implement absolute total registration of every person on the planet. So this enumeration at birth thing goes with Agenda 21 of the United Nations, that every child has a right to be registered. It turns out that they're turning it into every human has an obligation to be registered. So so I'm not going too much more into the depth of where this thing is coming from. I just will tell you that I'll move on. So here's the Code of Federal Regulations, 42 CFR. So 42 United States Code is the Health and Human Services Code. So there will be a Code of Federal Regulations. So there's a statute, United States Code, and then the regulation is the executive agency taking that statute and putting it into practice, thinking about what the statute says, what does the Constitution allow, and give instructions that give a little more detail. So what does the Social Security, what's the purpose? Is it a purpose to number you? Or is there some other real compelling interest, or no, not even compelling, legitimate interest, if it's a legitimate interest of government? What is it? So I'm going to go to the Code of Federal Regulations, which explains what it is. The Social Security Administration, let's see what it says. I'm going to zoom in a bit. Here we go. The Social Security Administration maintains a record of the earnings reported for each individual assigned a Social Security number. What about if you can work in the United States without a number and you don't have a number? How do you record earnings? I'm going to leave that for somebody else's discussion. So the Social Security Administration maintains a record of the earnings reported for each individual assigned a Social Security number. Thus, let's say there's somebody who's volunteered to become a United States employer. They've filled out the SS4 form and says, please, I want to be an employer of the United States. I want to change my status to become an employer of the United States. And the United States executive branches, the bureaucracies, are tolerating people to have gained the status of a United States employer, even though, as a matter of law, they wouldn't otherwise be required to. But let's say somebody becomes a United States employer. Now, if they hire somebody as their employee, they have an obligation to pay employee and employer taxes. So, and with that obligation, and you know what? I'm going to put us on pause right here. So we're going to come back to this. I'm going to take a break because somebody here coming to fix this computer right now. So we're going to come back here, and I'm going to close it with this. They're going to be maintaining a record of earnings. We're going to come back with that topic in a few minutes. So again, like, subscribe, share, and according to your inspiration, consider giving a gift so that we can, let's say, expand this so that it gets to more people and is a little more effective. So I appreciate your time, and we'll be back.